Hello everyone, thanks for tuning in. Today I have an amazing founder, Michael, of Storyverse, and I thought it would be very worthwhile for him to share his insights with us. So Michael, thanks for joining us.
I'm very happy to be here.
Tell us about the origin story.
The origin story of Storyverse is really actually like two simple things. The first is me and my co-founder, Justin, both had a very strong background in gaming technology and social games, and the biggest problem there is very much how do you get the audience, right? And oftentimes in gaming, the hardest thing is sort of how do you get people to actually engage with your product? That's probably the number one, sort of obstacle in gaming. And probably 99 or maybe even 99.9% of games fail just because of the marketing piece. And so we were looking sort of at a lot of things in Web3. If you want to go into a metaverse, oftentimes, and by the way, there's many great metaverses that are kind of works in progress, but oftentimes it's sort of you're on your iPhone and it's well, no, move to a desktop.
Yeah.
No, go download something. And our view is well, what we're really interested in is bringing the sort of metaverse into our daily lives, into social media, Twitter or Discord or right on your phone, and something that really normal people can just very easily jump right into. And so that led us to kind of these two components. And one is the technology side of how can we allow people to, when they see something funny, tap it and then be immersed in it. Just that easy, no downloads, no thinking, no rules, just tap and then you're in the middle of it. And two is what is the most across the entire world, what is the common thread that every culture shares and that every person shares? And for that, it's storytelling. Every single culture throughout the entire, it's almost like a tautology that throughout the history of humanity, every culture we know about has storytelling, because otherwise we wouldn't even know about them, right?
Right.
And so we decided, what if we took storytelling and combine it with this absolutely frictionless onboarding and built that in kind of the Web3 space. And you have this really exciting ecosystem of NFTs and PFPs, all these crazy characters, but how do we bring them to life? How do we make your Bored Ape or your Punk or whatever it is fully animated and fun and talking, and how do we make them into characters?
Yeah.
And so Storyverse does all that. You can look on Twitter, there'll be a little, almost like a comic book or an animation. You're oh, what is this? You tap it and you're immediately, no matter what device you're on, you're in this fully immersive story. You can tap through it. It's almost like a choose your own adventure. You can say, oh, if it were Matrix, it's do I want to take the red pill or the blue pill? You make your choice, and maybe you can even mint a red pill option or a blue pill option. And we really see it as probably the biggest onboarding opportunity into Web3 for entertainment.
Can you tell me about the different iterations your product kind of took along the way to getting here?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think in Web3, it's really tricky to start by building the whole conception of it and then trying to figure out the marketing. These things go hand in hand. You start building and then you learn that the way in which you connect to your customers, might require a minor tweak to the product, maybe a major tweak to the marketing and, kind of where you're trying to find that audience. But it goes back and forth. And so our approach is to say well, we want 1 billion people, or more. We want to connect 1 billion people through storytelling. How are we going to do that? It means the sort of stories, think of them as little comic books or little animations. They need to be funny or compelling or memeable, right?
Yeah.
And so we just said, okay, we need to find a way where of this community where you've got a whole network of authors and writers and creators in a distributed way creating stories. The output needs to be something funny and interesting. Mm-hmm. And if it's funny and interesting, then people are going to come on board. And so we just said, okay, before we figure out the exact on-chain tokenomics of how these story writers, are making money, and that's actually quite interesting in and of itself, but before we figure that out, let's make sure that the stories they're making are interesting to normal people, because we could get all of the economics right, and we might be able to make something that kind of goes up really fast, and I don't know if it would stay or not, but if we don't get that fundamental piece of is what's coming out of this project something humans care about, then it won't matter. So we basically just said we're going to launch a non-Web3 version where there isn't kind of the Web3 tokenomics, compensation happening yet, but we're going to find true believers who understand that it's coming, but they're willing to dog food it, with us for now. So they're willing to make stories and try it out and share it on Twitter. And we actually built a pretty vibrant community that way. And then it allows us to very rapidly release new versions of the tools. And so where we're going is sort of as the tooling is kind of better and better and the stories are, being shared more and more widely.
Yeah.
Is to actually layer the economic model on top.
I hear you. So does this mean you are contemplating doing a decentralization and tokenization downstream, and you're starting off with perfecting the value proposition and the workflows inside the app?
Well, yeah, so from our perspective, when you think about what opportunities have been created for artists and creators in Web3, like the first and most obvious one is like NFTs, created this opportunity, especially PFPs, where it's like if what your talent is sort of making artwork, then how do you turn that into like a business model? We've had the internet for a long time, and everyone said, oh, the internet erodes the potential business model of like an artist, right? And that was kind of the common wisdom. So now the thinking is, well, actually you can pair creating art with a blockchain, and actually turns out to be one of the best possible business models that we've ever seen. But that's for basically visual artists around the world. It's like, if you think about creators and artistic people, there's a whole spectrum. And so for us, the next question is like, what about people telling stories? Like storytellers are some of the most important people in sort of humanity's history. That's how we even know our history.
Yeah.
But like, the internet is sort of like you make a blog and people might read it, but like where's the business model? And so we said, well, what we need is an economic model where if you are a storyteller and you have a following and you have like a set of people who are really, really excited to engage, then there should be a way to make a lot of money.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so now I'm looking at a universe where content creators can make stories and have actually not just one story, but a path that's unfolding in front of my audience. So can you tell me about my possible pseudonymity? Can I share with the world marvelous stories that are figments of my imagination without revealing who I really am until I'm super famous?
Yeah, well, the funny thing is, some of the best stories that we have in our history, like we don't always know who the author is. Like we call them folktales. And so like storytelling, I think, is like the original Web3, because you just do it without permission. You make up a story, and if people like it, then like it sort of gets replicated, and it sort of exists in our system of record, which is just sort of like our history. But it's sort of shared. But what's so cool is that people can just say like, oh, I like this story, but let me fork it and like make my own version, right? And so I think what's so interesting about stories is that like a lot of times the way you get to know an author is through their work. You don't start reading some author's biography and then decide if you want to read their book or not. Sometimes, right? If the president writes a book, maybe you read it because of the president. But oftentimes you're excited about the story. It's like people didn't go and look at Harry Potter for the first time and say, oh, a J.K. Rowling book, let me read that. They started by saying, oh, Harry Potter, that's interesting. They read that. And so for us, it's like content comes first. And so the ecosystem we envision is one where you could coordinate like basically all of the creative storytellers on Earth in sort of a metaverse where they can have their own little universe, or a connected universe, or a multiverse. But the rules don't always have to follow. You have, sort of competing stories, and it's okay. And what really matters is sort of like, do these stories engage people? Do they engage an audience? And if so, is there a way to involve that audience in kind of ownership of the whole like story, narrative web creation? And if so, like the least kind of interesting part about this, I think, is actually the identity of who it is. And so like, I actually really do think that we're going to have potentially some of our most successful storytellers be people that maybe they are famous, but they don't even attach that name to the stories they tell. They let their work speak for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. We ran a survey, and our founders highlighted 3 main things as points of pain for them. Any insight on product market fit, compliance, or recruiting you'd like to share?
Yeah, so those are 3 really important aspects. Something that surprised me creating Storyverse is, we were creating a new entity that we were spinning out of, essentially our incubating parent company. And in doing that, we have like really major investors and a board of directors and a general counsel who's fantastic, and it's very buttoned up. But it means, like at that level, you got to cross every T and dot every I. And so you enter this really like jungle of trying to understand, all these different laws, from like corporate tax laws to securities laws, to different liabilities and things like that. But sometimes the most important thing is just like to get it done. And I think if you're already talking to the top law firms, you're probably pretty safely down the path of trying to do the right thing. And I think if you're trying to do the right thing and you're trying to follow the laws, that kind of spirit and intention is sort of what carries through. But if you try to go from like 80% perfect to 90% perfect, it adds like a couple of months. If you try to go from 90 to like 100, it adds like a year or more, right? And so there's sort of this like question of like, how perfect do you need to be? And I think everyone has their own answer, but like it feels to me like if you're wasting more than a couple of months to get this right, then you might lose sight of like what you're actually trying to do, which is for us to build the #1 fiction story metaverse.
I hear you. So thanks for the insight.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Feel free to reach out.